1. The subtle power of social influence. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath and imagine you're walking down a quiet, peaceful street, alone. The night air is cool, brushing against your skin. There's a soft hum in the distance, the distant sound of traffic, the occasional footsteps of someone walking on the sidewalk, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The world feels calm, even serene. You feel at ease, alone with your thoughts, enjoying the quiet. But then, as you walk along, something catches your ear, a faint sound. At first you dismiss it, thinking it's just the wind. But then, it happens again. A scream. It's distant but unmistakable, a sharp cry for help that pierces the air. Your heart begins to race. You stop in your tracks. Was that real? You pause, standing still, your eyes darting around, searching for the source of the sound. Was it someone in distress? Or perhaps you think to yourself, it could be nothing. Maybe it was just someone shouting for fun. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe you misheard. But then, the doubt creeps in. The scream didn't sound playful. It sounded desperate. It sounded like someone who needed help. Your mind races as you try to decide what to do. Should you check? Should you call for help? You take a few cautious steps toward the alley where the sound seemed to come from. But then, you notice something strange. As you move, you see a small group of people gathered nearby, standing along the street. They don't seem to be moving, just standing there, looking at the scene. No one is running toward the alley. No one is even reacting as if they've heard anything unusual. The more you look at them, the more you realize they're just waiting for someone else to act, just like you. They stand there frozen. In this moment, something shifts. A part of you starts to question, why isn't anyone doing anything? And yet, you do nothing too. Everyone around you seems calm, composed, almost indifferent to the distress. You start to wonder if maybe you're overreacting, if maybe it's nothing to be worried about. But deep down, you feel an unsettling feeling in the pit of your stomach, something you can't quite explain. You continue walking. The sound of the scream fades into the distance, and the street feels quieter once again. You let out a small sigh of relief, as if the crisis has passed, as if you made the right decision. But the truth is, deep down, you know that you've done nothing. This is more common than you might think, and it's not as rare as we'd like to believe. In fact, it was precisely this situation that played out tragically in the case of Kitty Genovese in 1968. Kitty, a woman living in Queens, New York, was brutally attacked outside her apartment late one night. For nearly half an hour, she screamed for help, cried out in pain, and fought her attacker. Yet, despite dozens of people hearing or even witnessing parts of the assault, no one intervened. No one called the police. No one rushed to her aid. It's almost impossible to comprehend, right? How could so many people stand by and do nothing? How could anyone hear someone in distress and not take action? The answer, disturbingly, lies in a powerful psychological effect known as social proof. Social proof is a subtle yet deeply ingrained psychological bias that influences how we behave in social settings, especially when we're uncertain. At its core, social proof is the tendency to look at the behavior of others to guide our own actions. If others aren't doing anything, we assume it's okay to do nothing too. This psychological phenomenon works in both small, everyday situations and in more extreme, life-altering events. When we're unsure, we instinctively look around us to see what others are doing. If no one else is acting, then we feel less inclined to do so ourselves. In Kitty Genovese's case, no one intervened because, Subconsciously, everyone assumed that someone else would. Someone else will call the police. Someone else will step in. But in the end, no one did. And the outcome was tragic. Social proof isn't just a factor in emergencies. It shapes much of our everyday behavior, often without us even realizing it. Have you ever wondered why crowds flock to the busiest restaurants? Why people line up outside a trendy cafe? Or why certain fashion trends seem to blow up overnight? It's the same principle. If so many people are doing it, it must be right. Social proof plays a huge role in consumer behavior, perhaps more than you realize. Think about it. When a company tells you that millions of people use their product, or that something is the #1 bestseller, it taps into this deep psychological instinct. You trust it because you assume that so many people can't be wrong. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself if you really need the product, or if it's actually any good? Often, we don't think about it at all. Advertisers know this instinct well. That's why they show us testimonials with smiling, satisfied customers. Why they throw around phrases like, "Everyone loves this product," or "Thousands have already made the switch." These statements appeal to our subconscious need for social validation. When we hear that everyone else is doing something, we feel a sense of comfort and reassurance, and we buy into it. But it's not just companies that use social proof. The world of fake reviews is a perfect example. Have you ever noticed how easy it is for a product to accumulate hundreds, even thousands of glowing reviews, all saying the same thing? It's so easy to manipulate this form of social proof. A few fake reviews, a handful of paid actors, and suddenly, a product appears more trustworthy than it actually is. You don't even realize it, but you might have been swayed by the illusion of mass approval. And this trick is used far beyond product purchases. Think about the power of social proof in social media. It's why people rush to follow a trending hashtag, why viral challenges take off, and why opinions can seem to shift overnight. A few influencers posting about a product or idea can create a wave of support that feels overwhelming. Suddenly, the idea that was once obscure becomes mainstream. And even the most skeptical among us can get swept up in the tide. This is also the reason behind cults and dangerous ideologies. Cult leaders are often brilliant at manipulating social proof to create a sense of community and safety. They make followers believe that they are part of something larger, something important, and everyone around them is doing the same thing. It becomes easier to conform, easier to follow along, even if it's dangerous or wrong. Social proof becomes a tool of control. It's also how mob mentality works. When you're in a group, it's easy to lose sight of individual morals. In a crowd, people often engage in behavior they wouldn't consider doing alone. If enough people are doing something, it feels less risky, less wrong. If no one is stopping it, it must be okay, right? This is what makes social proof so powerful. It doesn't just influence what we buy or where we eat. It influences what we believe, how we act, and even how we view the world. When everyone else is doing something or believing something, it's incredibly hard to resist. Even if you don't think you're affected, the presence of others is constantly shaping your thoughts. The scary part of social proof is that it works on a subconscious level. We don't realize how often we are influenced by the actions of others, or how easily we fall into line. But once we understand it, we can start to recognize how we're being subtly manipulated, often without our knowledge. 2. The influence of social proof in everyday life. Take a moment to think about your day. Think about the small choices you make, from the moment you wake up to when you finally fall asleep. Perhaps it started with deciding what to have for breakfast or which route to take to work. Every decision you make, big or small, is influenced by something. But the most powerful force in shaping our choices is often invisible: social proof. We don't always realize how much we're swayed by others, but the truth is, it's a driving force in almost every choice we make. Social proof is a psychological principle where we assume that the actions of others reflect the correct behavior for a given situation. If many people are doing something, We tend to think it's the right thing to do. We trust what others are doing, especially when we feel uncertain. Let's explore this. Have you ever found yourself in a busy area, like a shopping mall or a restaurant, and you noticed a long line at a certain store or cafe? You're walking by, and for a moment you consider continuing on your way, but then you stop. The line looks really long. Something inside you shifts. You're curious. You start to wonder, if there are so many people here, maybe this place is worth checking out. You hadn't planned on stopping there. You didn't even know what they were selling, but the crowd made you think twice. And so, without much thought, you join the line. The presence of others changes your behavior. You've just witnessed social proof in action. You didn't want to be left out, so you went along with the crowd. This happens more often than we think, and in countless aspects of life. From the coffee shop to the choices we make about our careers, relationships, and even our values, social proof plays a significant role. Now let's pause for a moment and consider something deeper. Why do we follow the crowd so readily? Why do we allow the choices of others to shape our own decisions so easily? The answer lies in something deeply ingrained within our psyche, our need for safety and security. We are social beings by nature. From the moment we're born, we seek connection, validation, and reassurance from others. We want to fit in. We want to belong. When we see others doing something, it feels safe. It feels like we are aligning ourselves with the group, the collective, and there's comfort in that. Conformity, the act of adjusting our behavior or beliefs to match those around us, gives us a sense of ease. It reduces our uncertainty and helps us feel more secure in our decisions. Think about how this works in social settings. Have you ever been in a conversation where everyone around you seems to agree on a particular topic? It could be anything, a current event, a new movie, or a popular opinion. At first, you might not have an opinion on it, but as you hear the people around you speaking with such confidence, you start to feel a pull to agree. Not because you've given it much thought, but because it feels easier to just fall in line. It feels natural to go with the flow when the collective seems so sure of themselves. This is groupthink, a concept tied directly to social proof. Groupthink occurs when a group of people starts making decisions as a collective, and as a result, the individual's personal thoughts or doubts are suppressed. No one wants to be the outsider. No one wants to break the harmony. So the group moves together in a single direction, sometimes at the expense of critical thinking. And this can lead to poor decisions being made, all because everyone just went along with what the majority thought was right. Think back to a time when you've made a decision not based on your own research or gut instinct, but simply because everyone else was doing it. Maybe it was trying a new product because a friend recommended it, or joining in on a trend just because it seemed like the thing to do. It might have been something as small as watching a popular TV series because everyone else was talking about it, or something larger, like investing in a stock because a bunch of people on social media were raving about it. In many ways, social proof is harmless. It's part of our nature. But when it's used in manipulation, it becomes a tool of control. Have you ever seen an online ad boasting that millions of people use this product? That's social proof working on you. Or perhaps you've seen a service advertise how everyone is talking about it, or hundreds of positive reviews. Again, social proof. The underlying message is simple. If everyone is using this, then it must be something worth trusting. But think for a moment. How often have you questioned whether those reviews were real? How often have you doubted whether the crowd you're seeing is genuine? Social proof works by creating the illusion that everyone else is doing something, making you feel like you should too. This tactic doesn't just happen in consumerism, though. It happens in every facet of life. Look at how social proof works in politics. Think about how quickly political opinions or movements can spread through a population simply because everyone else is following the same narrative. It doesn't matter whether the idea is based on fact or not. The power of the majority is enough to convince many others to follow along. Consider social media. The viral nature of platforms like Instagram or TikTok is driven entirely by social proof. A single video, post, or hashtag can spread like wildfire, gaining momentum as more people like, share, and comment. As the number of likes and shares grows, so does the perceived validity of the message. Suddenly, something that started as an obscure idea can become a movement. And yet, the more people are involved in something, the less likely they are to question it. Social proof amplifies the message and makes it seem more legitimate. This is how misinformation spreads so quickly. A fake story or a misleading headline can be shared by thousands, and as the numbers grow, the story feels more authentic. People start to trust it, simply because everyone else is engaging with it. You've probably seen this with political or social issues, where an idea gains traction through constant repetition. It doesn't take long before the idea, no matter how flawed, becomes part of the collective consciousness. Once a few people start voicing their opinions, others feel compelled to join in, to fit in with the crowd, and soon, what was once an isolated opinion becomes the new truth for many. This brings us to the darker side of social proof: manipulation. When someone deliberately manufactures social proof, such as using bots to create fake likes or comments, or staging fake reviews, their goal is to convince you that the product or idea is more popular than it really is. It's a form of manipulation that relies on creating an illusion of consensus, and it's incredibly effective because of the trust we inherently place in the crowd. This manipulation doesn't just happen with products or ideas. It can also shape our very perceptions of reality. When social proof is manipulated, it can make us question our own thoughts, beliefs, and decisions. It can lead us down paths we might not have taken otherwise, simply because we're following the crowd without realizing the deeper forces at play. So, the next time you find yourself joining a trend or aligning with an opinion because it's what everyone else is doing, take a moment to pause. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it really my choice, or am I just following the crowd? Awareness is the first step in regaining control over your decisions. The power of social proof is strong, but with reflection, we can begin to make more intentional, authentic choices. 3. The bystander effect. Imagine you're at a crowded park on a warm afternoon. There's a gentle breeze, children are playing, and the sound of laughter fills the air. Everything seems peaceful. But then out of nowhere, you hear a loud crash. You turn around and you see a person collapse in the middle of the pathway. They're lying motionless on the ground, and it's clear that something is wrong. People around you start to notice. They stop what they're doing, and for a moment, everything seems to pause. But then, something strange happens. Everyone just looks at the person on the ground. Some stare blankly, others take out their phones, but no one steps forward to help. You look around. Why is no one moving? Why aren't they rushing to call an ambulance or help the person? You feel a sense of urgency rising within you. But as you glance at the crowd, you realize that you too have stopped. You haven't moved. You haven't made a call. You're waiting for someone else to act. And in that moment, you realize you've fallen victim to the bystander effect. The bystander effect is a powerful psychological phenomenon that shows how the presence of others can often reduce the likelihood of an individual taking action in an emergency situation. The more people there are around, the less likely anyone is to help. It's a paradox that seems counterintuitive. Why would more people mean less action? It all comes down to the diffusion of responsibility. When you're alone, the responsibility to act is clear. It's obvious that someone needs help, and there's no one else to turn to. You step in. But when there are others around, that sense of responsibility is spread out. Everyone assumes someone else will step up. This is why, in crowded places, people often freeze instead of taking action. The bystander effect was famously demonstrated in the case of Kitty Genovese in 1968. Kitty was brutally attacked outside her apartment in New York City. And despite the fact that dozens of people saw or heard the attack, no one intervened. No one called for help. The attack went on for over half an hour, and yet no one moved to stop it. Why? Because of the very same psychological force we're discussing, the bystander effect. Everyone around Kitty assumed that someone else would call the police or come to her aid, and as a result, no one did. The more people there were, the less likely anyone was to take action. The bystander effect is an example of how our behavior can be influenced by the people around us, especially in moments of crisis. It's not that people are indifferent or uncaring. It's that, in the presence of others, we tend to look to them for cues about how to behave. If no one else is acting, it becomes easier to justify our own inaction. But here's the unsettling truth. The bystander effect isn't limited to life or death situations. It can affect everyday decisions too. Have you ever been in a meeting or a group discussion where someone makes a suggestion and everyone just stays silent? No one offers their opinion, no one pushes back, and no one challenges the idea. It's as if everyone is waiting for someone else to speak up. This is social conformity at work. We all look to others for guidance, and if no one else is saying anything, we assume it's okay to stay silent. In many ways, the bystander effect highlights a deeper truth about human behavior. We are deeply influenced by the actions of others. In group settings, we tend to follow the path of least resistance. If no one else is doing something, we feel less compelled to act. The more people who are around, the less responsibility we feel to take charge. It's as if we're waiting for the signal that tells us it's time to act. This is why emergencies can often spiral out of control when there's a large group of people around. Think about it. In a situation where you're the only one present, it's clear that you have to step in. But if you're in a crowd and no one else seems to be reacting, it's easy to convince yourself that it's not your place or that someone else has already handled it. Now let's reflect for a moment. How does this apply to your daily life? How often have you been in a situation where someone needed help, but you didn't act because you assumed someone else would? Maybe it was a simple favor, like holding the door open for someone, or offering assistance when you saw someone struggling with a heavy bag. Perhaps it was a moment when you felt that someone else would take charge of a situation, and so you didn't need to step in. The bystander effect can also affect groups. How many times have you been in a situation where a group of people is silent on an issue, and no one is willing to take the first step to address it? It could be in a classroom, at work, or even among friends. Someone may need help or a topic may need to be discussed, but because everyone is waiting for someone else to speak up, the issue goes unaddressed. This happens because the bystander effect works in both big and small moments. It doesn't have to be a life or death emergency to have an impact. It could be a decision that affects the group as a whole, or an opportunity to make a difference that goes unnoticed. The key is that when no one steps forward, no one steps forward. Everyone assumes someone else will. Here's the interesting part. While the bystander effect might sound discouraging, we can fight it. By simply being aware of it, we can take action when we might otherwise stay passive. When we notice someone in need of help, we can override that instinct to wait for someone else. We can choose to be the one who takes the first step, even if others don't. In fact, studies have shown that when a person is singled out in an emergency, they are much more likely to receive help. This is called the direct request method. If you point to one individual in a crowd and ask for help directly, they're more likely to respond. Why? Because it eliminates the ambiguity. They no longer assume someone else will act. They've been asked directly. So what can we learn from the bystander effect? The first step is awareness. Recognize that it exists. Understand that in moments of crisis or uncertainty, you are not powerless. You can make a difference by taking the first step and leading by example. Don't wait for someone else to act. Trust your instincts, and you might inspire others to step up as well. By breaking free from the bystander effect, we become more conscious of how we behave in groups and how our actions, or inactions, can influence others. It's a subtle force, but it's also one that we can control if we choose to. 4. The power of cognitive dissonance. Imagine this. You're sitting in a quiet room, and for a moment, everything feels calm. There's nothing around to distract you. Your mind is still, the room is peaceful, and you have a chance to think. But then, something shifts. There's a growing discomfort in the back of your mind, a subtle tension. It's as if your thoughts are at odds with each other. You start to feel uneasy, as though something isn't quite aligning, and that tension is hard to ignore. This feeling is familiar to most of us, though we rarely stop to question it. We experience it often without understanding what's causing it. That subtle discomfort, that nagging sense that something doesn't quite add up, is the result of a psychological phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a term coined by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1957. It refers to the mental discomfort that arises when we hold two conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes simultaneously. It happens when our actions don't align with what we believe. This discrepancy creates an uncomfortable feeling, a tension that our minds are eager to resolve. But how we resolve it often says more about us than we realize. Let's break this down with an example. Imagine that for years, you've believed that smoking is harmful. You've seen the ads, read the warnings, and you know the risks. You've promised yourself that you would never smoke, as you're aware of how bad it is for your health. But then, one day, you're at a party. The atmosphere is relaxed, and someone offers you a cigarette. You hesitate for a moment, unsure. But the temptation grows. You take it. You smoke. Now, there's a problem. You've just acted in a way that contradicts your own beliefs. You know smoking is harmful, and yet you've just done it. That feeling of discomfort begins to build in your mind. You know that you should feel bad about it, but instead of confronting the guilt head-on, your mind starts working overtime to resolve the discomfort. One way your mind might do this is by rationalizing your behavior. You might think, well, it's just one cigarette. It won't hurt me. Or maybe you convince yourself, I'm stressed right now, and this will help me relax. By changing the way you think about the situation, you reduce the tension. You've adjusted your beliefs to justify your actions. This is cognitive dissonance at work. It's the discomfort you feel when your actions don't match your beliefs, and it's your mind's way of resolving the conflict. Instead of acknowledging that you've acted in a way that contradicts your values, your mind works to make the behavior seem more acceptable. This self-justification helps reduce the psychological tension and allows you to feel better about what you've done. But cognitive dissonance isn't just about smoking or making small, inconsequential decisions. It can be much more profound, and it shapes our beliefs and behaviors in ways that can be difficult to recognize. Think about the decisions you make in your own life. How often do you find yourself justifying a behavior that doesn't quite align with what you know is best for you? It could be something as simple as continuing to buy products from a company you know is environmentally harmful, even though you consider yourself eco-conscious. Or it might be something bigger, like staying in a job or relationship that no longer serves you, simply because you've already invested so much time or energy into it. These are examples of cognitive dissonance at work. We feel the discomfort of acting in a way that doesn't align with our values, but instead of confronting that discomfort head-on, we justify our actions. We tell ourselves, it's not that bad, I can make up for it later, or everyone else is doing it, so it must be okay. These justifications allow us to feel better about decisions that don't fully align with our beliefs, reducing the discomfort. This same principle plays out on a much larger scale, too. Think about how we hold on to beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Have you ever encountered someone who refuses to change their mind, even when presented with facts that contradict their beliefs? It's not that they're necessarily stubborn or closed-minded. It's that cognitive dissonance is powerful. When our beliefs are challenged, it creates a sense of psychological discomfort. And instead of accepting the new information, We often double down on our original beliefs, justifying them even more. This is where confirmation bias comes into play. Cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias work hand in hand to reinforce our existing beliefs. When faced with information that conflicts with what we already believe, we have a tendency to ignore it, dismiss it, or seek out information that supports our original view. The discomfort of cognitive dissonance can be so powerful that we prefer to remain in a state of psychological consistency, even if it means ignoring reality. Now think about advertisers and marketers. They know exactly how cognitive dissonance works, and they use it to their advantage. Advertisers often craft messages that create a dissonance in consumers' minds. They might show you an ad that presents a product as the solution to your problem, even though deep down, you know you don't need it. After you purchase the product, you might feel a sense of discomfort, a little voice inside that says, "I didn't really need that," or "I shouldn't have spent that money." But then, marketers use social proof to ease that discomfort. They show you testimonials from other customers, or they emphasize how popular the product is. Suddenly, you justify your purchase because everyone else is doing it, and the discomfort fades away. The process of rationalization is a core element of cognitive dissonance. By finding ways to justify our decisions, we relieve the tension between our actions and our beliefs. It doesn't matter whether the justification is based on reality. What matters is that we feel psychologically comfortable again. But here's where it gets tricky. This rationalization can spiral out of control. The more we justify small contradictions between our beliefs and actions, the more we are able to ignore the underlying dissonance. Over time, we might start to ignore our core values altogether, simply because it's easier to avoid the discomfort of facing them. And this is why cognitive dissonance is so dangerous. It can lead us to continue making decisions that go against our own best interests, simply because we don't want to confront the discomfort of being wrong. It can keep us stuck in behaviors that are not serving us, simply because admitting our mistakes would be too painful. So how do we deal with cognitive dissonance in a healthy way? The first step is awareness. Recognizing when you're experiencing cognitive dissonance allows you to pause and reflect. Instead of immediately justifying your actions, take a moment to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is this really in alignment with my values? What can I change to feel better about this decision? It's not always easy to confront the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. But when we can learn to sit with that discomfort rather than avoid it, we open the door to growth. We become more honest with ourselves and more aligned with our true values. And when we do that, we can make decisions that lead to greater fulfillment, rather than continuing to justify behaviors that ultimately leave us feeling empty. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful force in our lives. It shapes the way we think, act, and justify our decisions. But with awareness, we can take control of it, allowing us to live in a way that feels true to ourselves, without the constant need for rationalization. 5. The anchoring effect. Picture this. You're walking into a cozy, quaint store, the kind that has soft lighting and rows of beautiful items. Everything feels warm, inviting. There's a sense of calm as you take in the space, enjoying the quiet atmosphere. As you stroll through, something catches your eye. An item, perhaps a piece of artwork or a beautifully crafted lamp. You stop, intrigued. You glance at the price tag. Your first thought is, that seems a bit high for something like this. But then your eyes wander to a nearby display, and you see something else. It's another piece, a similar item, but this one is priced much higher. It's almost double the price of the first one. Suddenly, the first item doesn't seem so bad. In fact, it seems like a great deal. This shift in perception, it's the result of a psychological principle known as the anchoring effect. The first price you saw, this higher-priced item, served as an anchor for your mind. It was the reference point against which you compared everything else. And because of that, the second item now seemed much more reasonable, even if it was still higher than what you might have initially considered paying. The anchoring effect is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological tricks in our decision-making process. At its core, the anchoring effect occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when making a decision. That first piece of information, the anchor, then becomes the baseline for all subsequent judgments, and this anchor influences how we perceive everything else that follows, even if it has no real relevance to the actual value or decision. Let's think about this principle in a different context. Buying a car. Imagine you walk into a dealership and see a car priced at $40,000. At first, it seems steep, but before you can start second-guessing yourself, the salesperson shows you a similar model priced at $50,000. Suddenly, the $40,000 car doesn't seem so bad. In fact, it feels like a bargain. Why? Because the $50,000 price tag has anchored your perception of what's reasonable. The higher price has influenced your judgment of the more reasonably priced car. This is an everyday example of the anchoring effect, but it works in far more subtle ways, often without us even realizing it. The key to understanding the anchoring effect is that it doesn't just apply to numbers or prices. It can influence all sorts of decisions. Whether we're talking about salaries, time estimations, negotiations, or even how we judge people, the anchoring effect is constantly at work in shaping our perceptions. Now let's explore how anchoring affects salary negotiations. Imagine you're offered a job, and the initial offer is $50,000. You might hesitate thinking that it's lower than what you were expecting. But then, the hiring manager casually mentions that the average salary for this position is typically around $60,000. Suddenly, the original offer feels more acceptable, right? It seems like a fair deal in comparison, even though you might have been hoping for something higher. That initial salary number, the $50,000 offer, has become an anchor. Everything else you hear after that is now compared to that figure, and in your mind, that number has set a baseline for what you consider reasonable. Even if you were initially expecting a higher salary, the first offer influences your perception of what's fair. This is why the anchoring effect can be so powerful in negotiations. If someone starts with a high number, you're likely to settle for something that feels more reasonable in comparison, even if it's still not ideal. You're unconsciously influenced by the anchor, and it shapes how you perceive the final offer. The anchoring effect isn't just about numbers, though. It can also apply to time and how we perceive duration. Imagine someone tells you that a meeting is going to take an hour. Your brain anchors to that expectation. If the meeting lasts longer or shorter, you'll notice the discrepancy, and it may feel jarring. But if you weren't told about the duration, your perception of time might be much more fluid. That initial anchor, the hour marker, sets your expectation and shapes your experience. Let's go even deeper into how the anchoring effect influences our relationships and perceptions of people. Think about the first time you meet someone, the way they're introduced to you, the context of the meeting, even their appearance. All of these factors act as anchors that shape your perception of them. If someone is introduced with glowing praise, you're more likely to perceive them as accomplished, competent, and impressive, even before you've had a chance to form your own opinions. In contrast, if someone is introduced with a negative first impression, it's harder to see past that initial judgment. You'll naturally compare every action and word they say to that first anchor you've been given. This is why first impressions are so important. They act as powerful anchors that shape how we perceive people throughout the rest of our interactions. But the anchoring effect isn't always helpful, and it can sometimes lead us to make biased judgments. Think about political issues. If we're introduced to a particular viewpoint early on, perhaps through media, social circles, or even a personal experience, that initial information anchors our perception of the topic. As we encounter new information, we compare it to the first point of reference we've been given, and it becomes harder to see beyond that anchor. One of the most significant impacts of the anchoring effect is how it shapes consumer behavior. Think about how many times you've seen an item marked as 50% off, only to realize that its original price was inflated. The store uses the anchoring effect to convince you that you're getting a deal, even though the sale price is still higher than the item's actual value. The anchor, the original price, makes the sale price seem much more appealing, even though the item may not be as valuable as it appears. This effect is pervasive in marketing and advertising. Brands set high initial prices to create an anchor. When they offer sales or discounts, they emphasize how much you're saving, even though the discount might not be all that significant. The anchor distorts your judgment, making the sale seem like a better deal than it might actually be. Now here's the challenge. How can you avoid falling prey to the anchoring effect? The first step is awareness. Recognizing that the first piece of information you encounter, whether it's a price, a salary, or even a person's reputation, might influence your judgment is the key to making more rational decisions. It's about pausing and questioning. Is this anchor really representative of what I want or need? Does it align with my goals or values, or is it just pushing me toward a decision that feels easier based on the first piece of information? Once you recognize the impact of anchoring, you can actively counteract it. If you're negotiating, set your own expectations and keep those in mind before being influenced by an initial offer. If you're shopping, compare prices across multiple stores to avoid being swayed by the first price you see. In relationships, try to form your own opinions about people without relying too much on first impressions. The anchoring effect is powerful, subtle, and everywhere in our lives. It shapes how we perceive value, make decisions, and even how we form opinions. But when we become aware of it, we can take control and make decisions based on our true needs and desires, rather than simply reacting to the first piece of information that comes our way. 6. The halo effect. Imagine you're meeting someone for the first time. They walk into the room, and there's something about them that immediately catches your attention. Maybe it's their confident posture, the way they speak, or simply the way they carry themselves. Whatever it is, you're drawn to them. There's an aura about them that seems to shine through, and almost instantly you make an assumption. This person is impressive. Without even realizing it, you've just fallen under the influence of the halo effect. The halo effect is a cognitive bias in which our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their specific traits. In other words, if we perceive someone as being good in one area, perhaps they're attractive, confident, or well-spoken, we are more likely to attribute other positive qualities to them, even if we have no evidence to support it. The halo is the glowing, positive aura that surrounds them in our minds, coloring all our judgments about that person. Let's say you're watching an interview with a well-dressed, charismatic individual. Their answers are insightful and they speak with authority. You may leave that interview thinking, they're so intelligent, they must be an expert in everything. But here's the thing. That judgment is shaped not just by their knowledge or words, but by the initial impression you formed of them based on their demeanor and presentation. This is the halo effect in action. Our perception of someone's overall goodness or charm influences how we rate their other attributes, whether we've seen evidence for them or not. If someone is physically attractive, we tend to assume that they're also intelligent, friendly, or capable. This bias extends to how we judge people in professional settings as well. In the workplace, the halo effect can have a huge impact on hiring decisions, promotions, and performance reviews. Think about the last time you evaluated someone's performance. If that person was always punctual, polite, and presentable, you might subconsciously rate their work more favorably, even if there were areas where they didn't perform as well. The halo effect makes it easier to overlook flaws when the person as a whole is viewed in a positive light. The halo effect also works in the opposite direction. When we have a negative first impression of someone, we tend to attribute other negative qualities to them. This is called the horn effect, which is essentially the reverse of the halo effect. If we perceive someone as rude or unprofessional in one instance, we might assume that they're also incompetent or untrustworthy, even if we have no evidence to support that claim. It's important to recognize that the halo and horn effects are often subconscious. We don't usually realize that our perceptions are being shaped by initial impressions, but these biases affect how we treat others and how we judge their abilities, character, and actions. So why does this happen? The halo effect is largely driven by our need for cognitive efficiency. Our brains are wired to categorize and simplify information in order to process it more quickly. It's easier for us to generalize about a person's character based on just one positive trait than to evaluate each aspect of their behavior separately. The halo effect helps our minds create a coherent and unified image of a person, even if that image is incomplete or misleading. This bias doesn't just affect how we view individuals, it also shapes how we interact with them. When we have a positive view of someone, we tend to treat them better. We might offer them more opportunities, support them more in meetings, or simply enjoy being around them more. Similarly, if someone is on the receiving end of the horn effect, they may struggle to get a fair evaluation from others. Their performance might be overlooked, or their potential might be underestimated, simply because their initial impression was negative. The halo effect can also play a role in advertising. Companies use this bias to their advantage by associating their product with a well-known celebrity or influencer. If you like a particular actor or musician, for instance, and they endorse a product, you're more likely to view that product in a positive light, simply because you have a positive perception of the celebrity. Even if the product itself doesn't live up to expectations, the halo effect makes it harder to separate the endorsement from the product's true quality. This effect is also prevalent in branding. A company with a strong, well-regarded brand can have a halo that extends to all its products, making consumers more likely to purchase even unfamiliar items from that brand. If you already trust a particular brand for one product, say a high-quality smartphone, you might assume that their new laptop or smartwatch is just as reliable, even without researching it. Your trust in the brand as a whole influences your perception of individual products. Now let's take a moment to reflect. Think about how the halo effect might influence your own life. Have you ever made a snap judgment about someone based on one positive trait or initial impression? Maybe you met someone who was well-dressed and friendly, and you immediately assumed that they were kind and competent. Or perhaps you've been influenced by someone's social media presence, assuming they have a perfect life because of the polished images they post. This is where the halo effect can become problematic. When we let one trait, such as attractiveness or charm, overshadow a person's other qualities, we risk making judgments that aren't based on reality. We might overlook flaws or fail to see someone for who they truly are. The key to counteracting the halo effect is awareness. If you're aware that your judgment of someone is influenced by initial impressions, you can make a more conscious effort to separate the person's overall aura from their specific qualities. It's important to take a step back and evaluate each person based on their actions, behaviors, and the evidence available, rather than allowing one trait to cloud your perception. For example, in the workplace, take the time to assess someone's skills, performance, and character without letting their appearance or personality overshadow their actual work. Try to be as objective as possible, separating your personal feelings from your professional evaluation. The halo effect is a powerful tool that shapes how we perceive others, but with awareness and effort, we can learn to see people more holistically. By recognizing the bias at play, we can make fairer, more accurate judgments and create a deeper understanding of the individuals we interact with. 7. The availability heuristic. Imagine this. You're sitting on your couch, relaxing after a long day, scrolling through the news. Suddenly, a headline catches your attention. Another plane crash makes headlines today. You read through the details, and as you do, a feeling of unease starts to creep in. Your mind begins to race, and you can't help but think about the last plane crash you heard about. It was months ago, but for some reason, it's fresh in your memory. Your thoughts begin to spiral. What if something like that happens when I'm flying next time? You start to worry about your next flight. That feeling of anxiety builds in the pit of your stomach, and suddenly, the idea of getting on a plane seems much scarier than it did before. This shift in perception, this sudden fear of flying, can be explained by a psychological phenomenon called the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that causes us to base our judgments on how easily information comes to mind. Essentially, when we're making decisions or forming opinions, we rely on the information that is most readily available to us, whether or not it's the most accurate or representative. In this case, the recent plane crash you read about is the available information in your mind. Because it's fresh, your brain overestimates the likelihood of something similar happening to you. You begin to focus on the risks of flying more than the thousands of safe flights that occur every day. Your judgment has been swayed by a piece of easily accessible information, and it creates a distorted sense of danger. The availability heuristic isn't limited to plane crashes or rare events. It influences nearly every aspect of our lives, shaping how we assess risk, make decisions, and perceive the world around us. Our brains are constantly making judgments, and we often rely on what's easy to recall in order to make quick decisions. Unfortunately, this can lead to biased, distorted thinking. For example, when you think about crime in your area, your mind might immediately recall news stories or social media posts about robberies or violent incidents. These stories are vivid, often sensationalized, and easy to remember. As a result, you might start to believe that crime is more prevalent in your neighborhood than it actually is, simply because those stories are the most accessible in your memory. Your perception of risk is skewed because you're relying on the most readily available information. But the availability heuristic also plays a role in more everyday situations. Think about how we judge people based on the information we have about them. If you've had one bad experience with someone, maybe they cut you off in traffic, you might begin to think that they're rude or inconsiderate, even if that's not true for every encounter. The instance that's most available in your memory influences how you view that person moving forward. You may unconsciously ignore the many other times that person was polite or friendly because that single negative event is what sticks out. The availability heuristic is also heavily at play in media consumption. In today's digital world, we're constantly bombarded with headlines, social media posts, and news stories, many of which focus on rare or extreme events. Violence, accidents, natural disasters, and other shocking events get the most attention because they capture our emotions and grab our attention. As a result, our brains begin to overestimate how common these events are because they are the stories we see most often. The more vivid and memorable the event, the more likely it is to influence our perceptions, even if the event itself is statistically rare. Take, for example, the fear of shark attacks. When a shark attack makes the news, it's widely covered, often with dramatic headlines and sensational imagery. The story is unforgettable, and it sticks in your mind. You might even feel a sense of unease the next time you're at the beach. However, the reality is that shark attacks are extremely rare, and the risk of being bitten by a shark is minuscule compared to other everyday dangers, like car accidents or falling. But the availability heuristic skews our perception, making us more afraid of sharks than we need to be. The availability heuristic also plays a significant role in health-related judgments. When we hear about a rare illness or a specific health condition, we might start to believe that we are more likely to develop it, simply because it's been brought to our attention. Let's say you read a news article about a celebrity being diagnosed with a particular form of cancer. Suddenly, the thought of getting cancer might feel more immediate to you, even though the odds of developing that particular type of cancer are incredibly low. Your brain is relying on the available information, the news story, to judge your own risk, even though your actual risk is far smaller than your mind perceives it to be. So why does the availability heuristic happen? At its core, it's a mental shortcut our brains use to help us make decisions quickly. It's efficient. It helps us respond to situations based on the most recent or most memorable information. However, this efficiency comes at a cost. By relying on easily accessible memories, we can overlook more important but less vivid information. This leads us to make decisions based on incomplete or biased data. The availability heuristic also works in decision-making. When we have to choose between two options, we're often influenced by the information that is most prominent in our minds. If you've had a negative experience with a particular brand in the past, you might be less likely to choose that brand again, even though your overall experience with it has been positive. The negative experience stands out in your memory, and it influences your decision, even though it may not reflect the brand's overall performance. The availability heuristic is powerful, but awareness of it is the first step in making more informed decisions. When you're making judgments about risk, danger, or even people, it's important to take a step back and ask yourself, am I basing my decision on the most available information, or am I considering all of the facts? Am I letting one vivid memory cloud my judgment? For example, if you're worried about the safety of flying after hearing about a crash, try to remind yourself of the facts. Millions of flights take off safely every year, and statistically, the chances of being involved in a plane crash are incredibly low. By recognizing that your judgment has been influenced by a single, memorable event, you can bring yourself back to a more balanced perspective. Similarly, in the case of crime perception, try to gather data from reliable sources and get a broader view of the actual safety in your area, rather than relying on a single news story that may not represent the bigger picture. In all areas of life, being aware of the availability heuristic can help you make more objective, informed decisions, rather than relying on the stories and experiences that stick in your mind. The availability heuristic is an example of how our minds, in their effort to simplify decision-making, can often lead us astray. But by understanding how it works, we can make more mindful choices and avoid letting vivid memories distort our perception of reality. 8. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Imagine you're learning to play a new instrument. At first, the notes seem foreign, and your fingers struggle to find the right positions. But after a few weeks of practice, something amazing happens. You start to feel like you're getting the hang of it. You can play simple melodies, and you're pretty proud of your progress. In fact, you think to yourself, I'm pretty good at this. I might even be able to perform at a small gig soon. But then you take your instrument to a more advanced class, where you meet musicians who have been playing for years. They perform with ease, playing complex pieces without breaking a sweat. You suddenly realize that your understanding of the instrument is still basic. There's so much more to learn, and the gap between where you are and where they are seems vast. This feeling, the one where your initial confidence takes a sudden dive, is the result of a cognitive bias known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect describes a psychological phenomenon in which people with low ability in a particular area tend to overestimate their knowledge or skill, while those with higher ability tend to underestimate their competence. This bias causes people with limited expertise to feel disproportionately confident in their abilities, while those who are more skilled are often aware of how much they still have to learn. The Dunning-Kruger effect was first identified by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999. They conducted a series of studies in which participants were asked to assess their own abilities in various areas, like grammar, logic, and humor. What they found was that people who scored in the lowest percentiles on these tests were the most likely to overestimate their abilities. Conversely, those who scored the highest were more likely to underestimate their competence. This bias can be both comical and frustrating. It explains why some people, despite having limited knowledge in a field, will confidently offer their opinions on complex topics. Think about how someone with little medical training might confidently offer advice on health, or how a beginner in a particular hobby might claim to know everything about it after only a few weeks of practice. The Dunning-Kruger effect is at play here, as they have not yet accumulated enough experience to recognize the complexity of the subject. Let's put this in a more everyday context. Think back to a time when you were learning something new. Maybe it was a project at work, or a hobby you decided to pick up. In the beginning, it probably felt simple. You might have felt confident that you had a good grasp on it. After all, how hard could it be? But the deeper you got into it, the more you realized how much there was to learn. And maybe, just maybe, you felt a little humbled. The Dunning-Kruger effect explains that initial burst of confidence, when you're just starting out and haven't yet encountered the complexities of the subject. This effect is also why expertise often feels like a double-edged sword. When you're highly skilled in an area, you're aware of the subtleties and the gaps in your knowledge. This awareness makes you more cautious and humble in your assessment of your own abilities. You're conscious of how much more there is to learn, so you may underestimate your true skill level. In contrast, someone with limited expertise, due to their lack of experience, might feel like they know everything there is to know and confidently make decisions or judgments that are far beyond their actual capabilities. The Dunning-Kruger effect can be particularly problematic in professional settings. In the workplace, someone who has just started a job might feel overly confident in their abilities, leading them to make decisions without fully understanding the implications. This overconfidence can cause them to miss crucial details or overlook more experienced colleagues' advice. On the other hand, a highly skilled person might be hesitant to take charge or propose ideas, doubting their own expertise, even though they are the most qualified person to do so. This bias also extends to social media. In today's world, it's common for individuals with little expertise in a subject to share their opinions widely. People can find themselves trapped in an echo chamber, where they are surrounded by others who share similar limited knowledge, which further reinforces their belief that they are right. Because of the Dunning-Kruger effect, these people might end up being more vocal, more confident, and more convincing, even though their grasp of the subject is shallow. Interestingly, the Dunning-Kruger effect is self-perpetuating. The less you know about something, the more likely you are to be unaware of your lack of knowledge. As a result, you might continue to overestimate your abilities, not realizing that your confidence is misplaced. This overconfidence can lead to poor decision-making, or worse, to the spread of misinformation. The more you learn, however, the more you start to realize just how much you don't know, which often leads to a decrease in confidence, but a more accurate assessment of your true abilities. The good news is that the Dunning-Kruger effect can be overcome. Awareness is the first step in recognizing that overconfidence often stems from a lack of understanding. When you realize that your confidence may not be based on a true grasp of the subject, you can begin to approach it with humility and a willingness to learn. This mindset shift opens the door to real expertise because it helps you avoid jumping to conclusions based on incomplete information. For example, if you're learning something new, rather than assuming you understand it after a few lessons or reading a few articles, embrace the mindset of growth. Acknowledge that mastering any subject requires time, practice, and a willingness to admit that you don't know everything. This is what separates true experts from novices who may be fooled by their initial understanding. In addition, if you're in a professional or social situation where you're uncertain about your knowledge, don't be afraid to ask questions. Surrounding yourself with experts, asking for feedback, and remaining open to new ideas will allow you to build a more accurate self-assessment. Recognizing the limitations of your knowledge, rather than overestimating it, is key to making better decisions and achieving success in the long term. In sum, the Dunning-Kruger effect shows us that overconfidence can often mask a lack of expertise. It's important to recognize that, in the early stages of learning something new, we may be blind to the gaps in our knowledge. But with self-awareness, humility, and the willingness to keep learning, we can move beyond the initial overconfidence and truly begin to master whatever it is we're trying to learn. 9. The self-serving bias. Picture this. It's a sunny afternoon, and you've just wrapped up a big project at work. You've spent weeks refining it, putting in long hours, and coordinating with colleagues to ensure that everything comes together perfectly. When the final presentation happens, it goes off without a hitch. Your boss is impressed, your team is pleased with the results, and you feel a deep sense of accomplishment. But then, later in the day, you get an email. It's from a colleague offering some feedback on the presentation. While the feedback isn't harsh, they point out a few areas where they think the project could have been improved, some minor mistakes, things that didn't go as planned. Now, how do you feel? Chances are the praise you received earlier feels much more prominent in your mind. I did a great job, you think. I worked so hard, and it showed. But when it comes to the feedback, you might find yourself focusing on the negative parts. I can't believe they pointed out that one mistake, you think, brushing aside the positive aspects. Maybe they're being too critical. In that moment, you've likely fallen prey to a powerful psychological bias, the self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is a cognitive bias that causes people to attribute their successes to internal factors, like their skills, effort, or abilities, while attributing their failures or mistakes to external factors, like luck, others' actions, or situations beyond their control. This bias is part of a psychological defense mechanism that helps protect our self-esteem and makes us feel good about ourselves. The more we believe our successes are the result of our own hard work, the easier it is to feel confident and motivated. But the flip side is that we often fail to take responsibility for our shortcomings, which can limit our personal growth. This tendency to attribute success to our own abilities, while blaming failure on external circumstances, is natural, but it can be damaging in the long run. Think about a time when you succeeded at something. Maybe it was acing a test, completing a big project at work, or even winning an argument. How did you explain your success? If you're like most people, you probably gave yourself full credit for the win. I studied really hard, and I know I'm good at this, you might say. You feel proud of yourself, and rightfully so. But when things go wrong, like if you fail a test, don't meet expectations at work, or lose an argument, you're likely to point the finger at external factors. The test was too hard, or I didn't have enough time to prepare, or that person was just too stubborn to listen. This tendency to view our actions through a biased lens helps us maintain a positive self-image, but it also prevents us from seeing the full picture. The truth is, we don't always succeed because we're the best or most talented. Sometimes we succeed because we were in the right place at the right time, or because circumstances aligned in our favor. And when we fail, it's not always due to bad luck or external factors. Sometimes we just didn't put in the effort, or we didn't make the best choices. Why does this happen? The self-serving bias is rooted in our need for self-esteem. As human beings, we are wired to seek validation, to protect our self-worth, and to avoid feelings of inadequacy. When we succeed, our self-esteem gets a boost, and we feel validated. But when we fail, it threatens our confidence and can leave us feeling defeated. So our brains create a way to protect us from that emotional discomfort by attributing failure to things we can't control. But while this bias helps shield us from feelings of inadequacy in the short term, it can have long-term consequences. By constantly attributing our successes to ourselves and our failures to external factors, we miss the opportunity to learn from our mistakes and grow. If we never acknowledge our role in our failures, we're doomed to repeat them. Take a moment to reflect on how the self-serving bias might play out in your life. Have you ever made an excuse for why something didn't go as planned, only to later realize that you could have done things differently? Maybe you blamed a colleague for a mistake you made, or you blamed the weather for ruining an event. We all do this from time to time, but it's important to recognize it when it happens. The truth is, We can't grow and improve if we don't take ownership of our mistakes and learn from them. In relationships, the self-serving bias can also cause problems. Think about how you react when there's a disagreement. If things go well, you might feel great about the outcome, and you might attribute the positive resolution to your ability to communicate or compromise. But when things go wrong, you might be quick to blame the other person. You might think, they didn't listen, or they were too stubborn. By failing to take responsibility for your own actions or mistakes, you prevent the relationship from improving and becoming stronger. This bias can also emerge in social settings. Let's say you're at a party and you're talking to a group of people. Someone else dominates the conversation, and you feel like you're not being heard. When you leave, you might think to yourself, they were just being rude. They didn't give me a chance to speak. But what if the truth is that you were quiet or didn't actively engage in the conversation? By attributing the negative experience to someone else, you avoid examining your own role in the situation. This lack of self-awareness can lead to misunderstandings and unresolved conflicts in the future. The self-serving bias is also at play in sports. Think of an athlete who wins a game. They might attribute their success to their natural talent or hard work. But when they lose, they might say, the referees were biased, or the other team was just lucky. This pattern of thinking helps athletes maintain their confidence and motivation, but it can also hinder their development if they don't recognize their own shortcomings and work to improve. Overcoming the self-serving bias. While the self-serving bias is natural, the key to overcoming it is awareness. Once you realize that you tend to overemphasize your successes and blame external factors for your failures, you can begin to change that pattern of thinking. Start by regularly reflecting on both your wins and losses, and ask yourself, what role did I play in this? What could I have done differently? Instead of immediately jumping to conclusions or making excuses, challenge yourself to look at the situation objectively. By recognizing your own responsibility in both successes and failures, you'll be able to learn more effectively and improve in the future. Additionally, feedback from others can help you break through the self-serving bias. When someone offers constructive criticism, instead of brushing it off or making excuses, take a moment to consider their perspective. What can you learn from this feedback? How can you use it to improve? Accepting constructive criticism is a key step in personal growth and development. The self-serving bias doesn't just shape how we see ourselves, it shapes how we interact with others, how we handle failure, and how we approach challenges. By becoming more self-aware and accepting both our successes and failures with a balanced perspective, we can break free from the bias and cultivate a more authentic, humble approach to life. Only then can we truly grow and reach our full potential.